Hello, my name is Becca Schrog, and I will be doing my presentation on sustainable development. So to start, I'm going to define sustainable development, and the United Nations World Commission on Environment and Development defines it as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet theirs. This definition is based on the Brundtland Report, which came out in 1987. In the past, sustainable development has used environmental economics to drive sustainable development. Environmental economics uses free trade, which promotes economic growth, and this reduces poverty and leads to less environmental degradation. That is the assumption that environmental economics is based on. In 1995, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development was created, and this is comprised of over 200 companies. Their goal is to accelerate transformations needed for net zero, nature positive, and a more equitable future. To do this, they build networks that share information, adopt standards and tools, and create advocacy. Some of the problems with sustainable development are as follows. The first one is based on Thompson, 2004, with the idea of tyranny of small decisions. It's the aggregated decisions of many ecologically linked landowners that produce ecologically disastrous results. Even on large scales, we do not see our impact until it's too late. This relates to sustainable development because unfortunately it has led to maldevelopment and underdevelopment. The second problem with sustainable development is that it uses environmental economics for sustainable development, and that economic development will lead to a sustainable future. The assumption of environmental economics is that you need rapid economic growth in all countries, free market access to goods, larger capital flows, and many more things to achieve sustainable development. It also requires that countries set their own environmental goals. A third problem with sustainable development is that there exist a lot of goals, but little tangible suggestions for actions. There's not a lot of hard policies or suggestions for actions to take. The fourth problem with sustainable development is that there's a large assumption that free trade will increase economic growth, which reduces poverty and then achieves less environmental degradation. And this is basically saying that poverty leads to environmental degradation, which has ethical ramifications. So, going on to ethical ramifications, sustainable development is still development. It requires production and consumption of materials which have environmental costs. It also uses space that could be used for conservation or preservation for wildlife and native species. Developed countries can more easily transition to sustainable materials because they're economically situated to do so, whereas developing countries will not be able to access those resources as easily. The other ethical ramification is that, as I mentioned earlier, poverty is the reason for environmental degradation, that assumption, and not that the transfer of goods is the reason. And then the fourth one is that sustainable development still means that access to transportation is inequitable, the distribution of pollution will still be uneven, and environmental justice will still continue to be an issue. Sustainable development, as it is defined, does not touch on these issues in a tangible way. So here are two associated policies that I could find. These are not laws or requirements, they are just goals or policies. The first one is the National Sustainable Development Policy, and this was created in Barbados. The overarching goal of the policy is to ensure the optimization of the quality of life for every person by ensuring that economic growth and development does not occur to the detriment of our ecological capital. And there are 4 objectives that you can look up. Unfortunately, I do not have time to name them. The second policy is the United Nations 17 Goals. This was created in 2015. And those goals are no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, industry innovation and infrastructure, reduced inequalities, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production, climate action, life below water, life on land, peace, justice, and strong institutions and partnerships for the goals. So these goals do touch more on ethical issues, unlike the Brundtland Report. So policy effectiveness, again, as I mentioned earlier, they aren't really policies, they're goals. And so there are no ramifications if someone or a country does not consider sustainable development. Cities, municipalities, and towns can all have development that's not sustainable. Just recently, in the town I work for, they approved some subdivisions that have requirements on pesticide and herbicide usage, so you have to maintain your lawn. The other issue with these policies is that they're not applicable on large scales. As I read off the 17 goals, they're very large, overarching goals, and not, you can't just apply those to a small city without having to take a lot of time and effort to do so. The third issue is that these policies are not grassroots movement created by the people. They are top-down solutions, which have their benefits, but they tend to be less effective. And just as a side note, the United States hasn't updated their efforts or findings for sustainable development goals ever. And so there's no ramifications for them not to. Some ethical suggestions I have would be to view sustainable development through a postmodern ethics lens. Postmodern ethics is described as subjective understandings of the self and the other, assist us in building respect and identifying differences that can be worked into developing a deeper moral practice with diverse interests in decision-making, according to Postmodern PowerPoint. So basically, it asks that we respect others and have humility and see things from other people's perspectives. What I like about postmodern ethics is that it looks at power dynamics and encourages discussion about what isn't working. So in the lens of sustainable development, large developed countries were able to grow cheaply and rapidly using fossil fuels. And then they put too much carbon into the atmosphere, and now they're trying to put limits on emissions, which affects developing countries because they are not able to grow as quickly or rapidly. Postmodern ethics suggests that we use emergent ethics to negotiate interests using community members so that everyone has a say in what ethical uses we have going forward. Some policy adjustment suggestions that I have would be to adopt legislation based on ecological sustainability. White and Tuttle touch on this, and they mention some pillars for ecological sustainability. Those are land, health, and rightness of human action, humans as part of the land, and large-scale system-level sustainability. These would, at a minimum, require developers to think about the impact they're having on the land and human health, and it might even encourage more compact, dense housing, more natural conservation, and increased public health resources. The second policy adjustment suggestion I have is to adopt restorative economics. These use power of markets to bring environmental restoration, which includes higher prices for non-renewable resources, waste, and green taxes to internalize the environmental externalities of production. This would mean that natural gas and coal-powered energy would be much more expensive and encourage a faster transition to renewables. It would also mean that trash, hazardous waste, and recycling would cost more to encourage reducing and reusing items. It would cost companies and corporations more to produce material that's not reusable. And what I like about it the best is that it puts pressure on companies and not users or individuals to reduce waste, whereas in our current climate, it is solely on the individual to reduce or recycle. In the lens of sustainable development, it would make it easier because materials that are green would be less expensive than those that degrade the environment, and it would give developing countries an equal footing for continuing to grow their economy while still growing sustainably. Thank you.